Hello and welcome back to another Faith in Action podcast from the Christian Institute. I'm Angus and today I'm joined by policy researcher Jenny Olson and by Senior Public Affairs Officer Joanna Tim. Guys, thank you for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you on today. We are going to be talking a lot about sanctity of life issues in just a moment, but we're also going to be answering some questions that people have been asking us recently. And just a reminder, if you want to ask any questions, then just email us at faithinaction@christian.org.uk and we'll endeavour to answer those questions as and when we can. You two are on camera today, but of course you are very used to being on camera because you've both been involved with the Bulletin over the years. How have you found that?
I think it's great fun, to be honest. I love the team. I think having the opportunity to communicate with our supporters is really valuable. It can be quite overwhelming, all the different issues going on. So I think it's really worthwhile kind of endeavour to make sure we can briefly summarise some of the key things people can be keeping abreast of and praying about as well in their churches.
I know we get contact from a lot of people, particularly if you go out to a public meeting, that people say, "Oh, I watch your bulletin and it's really helpful, and it does help us to pray." I was just saying before we started rolling that the chairs that we've got are a lot nicer than the ones that we have to sit on, the stools that we sit on for the bulletin. But yeah, any other advantages you think to being on this podcast?
It's nice to do it together.
Yeah, it's nice to do it together, and it's nice to have an opportunity to do a bit of a long form interview and also speak about some of the issues that we've been working on.
Well, if you want to get more of that bulletin, if you want that in your inbox each week, do please sign up to get our emails at the.ci/sign up, and you can be kept up to date with all of the latest news that is going on. But today, let's talk about sanctity of life. Can you guys just tell us over the last, it's only really a couple of weeks, last month, what's been going on?
So I guess start with the big historic win, which was earlier this month, MSPs voted to reject Liam McCarthy's assisted suicide bill by 69 votes to 57. It was almost a kind of mirror image to what we saw at stage one of the bill. And what's so significant about it is that for many, many months, we've been told that it's basically an inevitability that Scotland will have an assisted suicide law, that MSPs will support this legislation. So it's just amazing to see the way in which God has answered our prayers, the prayers of his people, and the way in which he has spared Scotland from this evil. And it's a real encouragement to us as a staff team, and it's been a long campaign, along with the abortion issue for those of us at the Christian Institute and so many others working kind of round the clock on this issue.
And we'll sort of dive into all of that in just a moment. And then we've also got this abortion decriminalisation thing, and that is a really difficult vote to kind of come to terms with as well. Peers voting that they want to keep a clause in the bill that allows women to have abortions all the way up to birth, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But let's stick with assisted suicide. We've got the two things. We've got Westminster and the Leadbeater bill, and then we've got Scotland and the MacArthur bill, and thankfully that has been voted down, as you mentioned. There was a big swing, wasn't there? Because at the last vote at stage one, it was 70 to 58?
70 to 56.
56. And it's basically just swapped. And, I think everyone was expecting it to be quite close, but it didn't end up being close in the end. Why do you think that was, really?
I think there has been a lot of really hard work done to raise the issues around safeguards and what we've seen in practice abroad. And that's been from a range of campaigners, from disability rights groups, women's groups, raising concerns around domestic abuse and coercion. And then in the final stage, where MSPs were considering final amendments to the bill, there were some very compelling speeches from people who were deeply concerned about what this bill would mean for Scotland. And I think ultimately there were some quite basic amendments proposed which were rejected, which would have prevented some of the worst things we've seen abroad.
Like what kind of amendments?
Well, I mean, probably the biggest, the most standout one would have been from Daniel Johnson. He's an MSP for the Edinburgh area, and he had been working very closely on this bill, trying to see if there's any way to make it safe. And one of his proposals was to prevent doctors from being able to raise it with patients unprompted. And of course, in places like Canada, we know that this has led to people coming into hospital and then first being offered drugs to take their own lives before any other treatment, or people have come seeking support, perhaps for adjustments for disability, to help them live life to the full, and they've been told, okay, you would face a really long waiting list to get that support, but actually you could get assisted suicide drugs within a much shorter period.
That sort of thing is just dreadful, isn't it? And I don't think a lot of people have actually realised that this is the situation in Canada, because everyone's been told Canada's got this great system. They've had it in place for 10 years now. Everything's going absolutely fine, and that's not the reality.
And it is a horrifying reality when you think of the implications of a doctor being able to raise assisted suicide unprompted with a patient for individuals with learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, because those individuals are particularly vulnerable and susceptible to the suggestions of authority figures. So you could see how someone at a particularly low moment in their life, they've received a terminal diagnosis and they're particularly hopeless and vulnerable, could interpret a doctor initiating a conversation about assisted suicide as a recommendation and as an endorsement. And there was nothing actually in the MacArthur Bill that would have prevented a doctor, which is horrifying, from recommending assisted suicide as a treatment option.
And now you, Jenny, you were actually up in Holyrood. You were sitting in on some of the debates. What kind of things did you see where you thought this is actually going to be changing MSP's minds? You mentioned some of the amendments that were rejected, some of the speeches. So what were some of those key things?
Yeah, I think so. I was, like you say, I was up north in Holyrood, and I was sat in chamber. And Ruth Maguire, she actually has cancer. She's an MSP, and she stood up to speak in the amendments debate. And the chamber, like all the rustling of papers and everything, it went silent when she spoke. And she raised her concerns about coercion, but also about, as Joanna was just saying, about the vulnerability of all people when they receive a terminal diagnosis. And she said something to the effect of, my blood runs cold to imagine being sat in a room with a doctor and having them bring up assisted suicide as a treatment option alongside others. And that she was actually quite scared, and she wouldn't normally like to. She'd normally like to speak about hope and positive change, but actually in this instance she had to say that she was afraid of what this bill would mean for people like her who received terminal diagnosis, and it was a very powerful contribution.
And Jeremy Balfour was quite a powerful speech in that final debate as well.
Yeah.
He had a disability that he was born with, didn't he? And he was saying that he relies on family and friends to get him up, get him dressed, and get him to work and things like that. And he said disabled people like him are absolutely terrified of what an assisted suicide law would mean for them, and yet disabled people, generally disabled groups, were not really included in the process for quite a long time.
Yeah, in committee, some of the groups did give evidence, but I think something from Liam MacArthur and proponents of the bill, which was said quite a lot, was that, disabled people support this. But of course, we know that's not true. And all of the disability groups in Scotland are opposed to this bill.
Actually, I think just in the last couple of weeks, there was a European disability group, comprising of loads of different groups from across Europe. They came out and said, we've analysed it. We don't think assisted suicide / assisted dying can be safely implemented anywhere. So it's not just in Scotland. It's not just at Westminster. Disability groups all over the world are saying, no, you can't do this safely.
And I think kind of United Nations work around disabilities, they've really criticised how it's operated in Canada, and that this is actually very, very dangerous for people with disabilities. I think it's very wrong how Liam MacArthur and others have just disregarded the threat. They seem to suggest that because the bill as it stands, or as it stood, wouldn't have automatically allowed disabled people access to those drugs. It didn't seem to grasp that if someone was disabled by an illness, that they would still be exposed to the prejudices which people experience, sadly, within our NHS today.
And if you look at the international picture on this, what's really clear is that people are often not opting for assisted suicide primarily because of their terminal illness, but because of their circumstances, things like being trapped in unsuitable housing, not being able to access palliative care or social care. And many times people are citing feeling a burden as one of the reasons why they're opting to end their life prematurely. I mean, if you look at Oregon, it's something like 42% of people who chose assisted suicide citing feeling a burden on family members, friends, caregivers. The number is even higher in Canada. And it shows that the kind of signal this legislation sends to individuals, I think disabled groups were really clear that they risked being devalued to death under the legislation.
Of course, so we know it was a bad piece of legislation that was being talked about in Scotland. Thankfully, it has been voted down, and that is, it is cause for celebration. I think, because yes, we absolutely sympathise with people who are on the other side, people who are suffering, people who are feeling hopeless, who feel like assisted suicide would be best for them. But we have to be able to say to people that assisted suicide is not the answer. The answer is high quality specialist palliative care, and I think we can thank God that the UK has some of the best in the world. Now, that doesn't mean that some people aren't let down, but we should really be focusing on ensuring that people who need that care actually receive that care. But it's still a good thing that this was voted down. Of course, Liam MacArthur and others, his supporters, vow that they're going to keep trying and they're going to try again. After the election in May, that there's going to be, someone is probably going to want to pick up the baton and try again. So there's no real room for people on our side of the debate to sit back and do nothing. So what's happening now, sort of in Scotland in particular?
Well, I think you're right that it would be unwise to just expect nothing more to happen right after the debate. Liam MacArthur said, there's an appetite for this in Scotland, and effectively said that they're going to keep, him and others will keep on pushing for it. And I think the first bill to come to the Scottish Parliament was from Margot MacDonald, who sadly passed away. And then her bill was taken over by Patrick Harvey. And I believe from when she first brought assisted suicide, and of course she actually called her bill assisted suicide. She didn't use euphemistic language, as we've seen more recently. But from those original days, I think there are a group of kind of key MSPs from that side who are very driven to bring this about. So we have some highly motivated politicians who want to see this become law in Scotland. So we need to keep on working hard to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think we can be thankful that it was a decisive defeat. But as you said, I don't think there's ever any room, sadly, on these issues for complacency. But what I'd personally love to see in the next session is a commitment to improve palliative care. I think if there's a positive to have come out of this debate, it's that there was more conversation around the inadequacy of palliative care in Scotland. I mean, according to Marie Curie, it's something like 1 in 3 people die with unmet palliative care needs. That's just not an acceptable situation. And so my hope is that we can move forward in a positive direction in really having a conversation, a national conversation about what can be done to improve palliative care. I mean, the assisted suicide issue has always been framed as this kind of vote for individual choice and autonomy. But I think what really came out in the stage 3 debate was that there's no real choice or genuine choice when people can't get access to high quality palliative care. And so I guess our message to new MSPs is that you have an opportunity here to address the inadequacy of palliative care in Scotland.
Because that is one of the tricky things, isn't it? That it gets argued, doesn't it? Whether it be in Scotland or at Westminster,
Yeah.
It's been argued that introducing assisted suicide, assisted dying, whatever people decide to call it, that the investment in end-of-life care doesn't drop. They say it actually goes up. Okay, well, that's because you are adding the additional costs of assisted suicide, but the actual palliative care costs and expenditure actually goes down. So the overall cost gets bigger, but actually palliative care investment does tend to get lower, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was a study done of palliative care increases in spending across Europe in particular places where assisted suicide legislation has been introduced, and then comparing it to where it hasn't. And it has gone up a little bit in those places, but it's been far exceeded by the increases in jurisdictions where they have not legalised assisted suicide. And in a committee in Scotland, MacArthur was unable to answer when I think it was Sue Webber, who's a Conservative MSP, kind of challenged him on this assertion that, if you adopt this, then it won't harm palliative care funding. And she actually brought up New South Wales, and they had a funding commitment of hundreds of millions of Australian dollars. But the funding was actually slashed substantially within about a year, and he had no answers. Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about Westminster. By the time this podcast goes out, things will be pretty much done and dusted in Westminster, because essentially the bill is going to be timed out unless something remarkable happens and there's a big change. Kim Leadbeater's bill is not going to pass, essentially. But a lot of the same issues have been coming up, haven't they? It seems as though it's kind of got a lot closer in some ways to getting passed. It's just had all this time in the House of Lords where there have been so many amendments that they've had to debate. Now, that's been framed by supporters of assisted suicide as they're all filibustering. They don't want us to pass this wonderful law. It's got so many safeguards. It couldn't possibly be better. This minority of like 2 or 3 members in the House of Lords who are tabling all these amendments, they're just trying to get in the way of democracy. That's not really the case, is it?
No, I mean, it's not reflective of the reality whatsoever. What the Lords have been doing is they've been forensically scrutinising legislation, and
Which they're supposed to do.
it's their job, and it's what MPs, in fact, expected them to do. A number of MPs voted for the bill on the basis that it would then somehow be fixed in the House of Lords. There is an expectation that the Lords would scrutinise the legislation. And it's the same as what we saw in Holyrood. Time and scrutiny are kind of our friends on this issue. And the more that MSPs in Holyrood and peers in Westminster scrutinise the legislation, the more they expose the flaws and the holes in the bill. And that's exactly what's been happening. And ultimately, if the bill had been well drafted in the first place, the Lords wouldn't have had to spend so many hours at committee stage on the legislation.
Yeah, you mentioned there that the more people scrutinise it, the more people don't like it, and I think that's the same for the public as well. Because Jenny, you mentioned Liam MacArthur says, oh, the Scottish public support it, but polling has actually shown that okay, when you first ask people, do you support assisted dying? You get a majority of people say yes. But as soon as you dig down into, okay, well, what does assisted dying mean? Loads of people have no idea what it actually means. And a lot of people think it just means palliative care. I mean, you would say that almost everybody supports there being good palliative care, but lots of people don't realise that actually it means giving people drugs to prematurely end their lives and what that looks like. And so it's actually... a lot of people just don't know really what is involved, and so you were absolutely right that the more people learn, the less appealing it is.
I think in Scotland support drops when voters consider the top 10 arguments against assisted suicide. It drops from above 70 to 19%. So I think the fact that MSPs also, when they scrutinised it, decided to reject the bill because it wasn't safe, is actually in step with voter opinion.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you what those top arguments are against assisted suicide.
Well, I think the one which shocked people the most was the fact that it's extended to children abroad in places like the Netherlands and Belgium. So that is the one which has affected people the most. But it's things like people feeling a burden, concerns around domestic abuse, kind of palliative care access, those sorts of just normal considerations of what would this actually look like in practice? What have we actually seen abroad? Sorry.
And I think coercion was also, just going back to what Jenny said earlier, it was a major one. I mean, the idea that someone could be coerced into choosing assisted suicide, I think that came out in the stage 3 speeches, that MSPs just could not simply have this as their legacy for a lot of them because of concerns around coercion. And I think if you look at domestic abuse reports, they very sadly rose 25% last year in Scotland. And the domestic abuse charities were very vocal on this issue about concern around an individual, a domestic abuse victim, being coerced into having state-sanctioned killing. And I think that was very influential in public opinion, and I think also in the chamber as well.
And so do you think it's all these same kind of concerns which have been dealt with in the House of Lords, because they've had over 1,000 amendments in the House of Lords debating Kim Leadbeater's bill? I mean, I guess they kind of break down into different categories, but what kind of things are being talked about with the Leadbeater bill?
Yeah, there's just a huge amount of overlap. I mean, on the issue, it's things like the doctor-patient relationship would be completely rewritten, concerns around undermining that integrity and trust that's so essential to the doctor-patient relationship. Coercion is, of course, as you'd expect, a huge theme. the impact on palliative care, the fact that the very people who'd be required to implement this legislation are overwhelmingly opposed. I mean, there are a huge number of palliative care doctors who said would consider resigning if their organisation were to offer it. And then going back to what you said earlier, the fact that if you incorporate an assisted suicide service into the NHS, it will inevitably compete with palliative and end-of-life care for funding. So I think they're big themes, and also, as you said, disability groups not being in support, and no support from medical bodies as well.
Royal colleges saying
exactly.
No. And these are colleges that are, in principle neutral, but they say, but not this, not this. And then there were all these questions surrounding hospices as well. Can hospices opt in, opt out? And that ended up not really being in Kim Leadbeater's bill either.
There's been opposition from both Kim Leadbeater and Liam McCarthy to introduce any institutional opt-out. And the argument is that it would create barriers to access. But we know that there are many hospices and care homes that are fundamentally opposed to this legislation and simply could not continue in existence, that they'd have to basically choose between their funding and continued existence. And so, yes, that's been a real concern, and there has thankfully been more kind of media attention on the issue of hospices. But I think, sadly, in Holyrood, it didn't maybe get the due consideration it should have. It was really dismissed by Liam McCarthy.
Yeah, and just to add, I guess, there were a number of amendments with MSPs trying to put those safeguards for hospices and organisations like homeless shelters, for example. But again, those were rejected, which I think just shows how strong the ideology is on that side, where kind of this principle of autonomy seems to trump all other considerations.
I want to talk about that actually, because Joanna, you mentioned before barriers to access.
Right.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that kind of the point of the whole thing? When we talk about safeguards, we're saying that if there is some kind of assisted suicide law, then it needs to be as narrow as possible so you don't get any excess deaths. You don't get anyone who's being coerced into it. You don't get anyone who just goes along with it for fear of being a burden or anything like that. And so it is just for those people who are terminally ill, who are in real dreadful pain, for whom palliative care is never going to work. And so when it gets talked about, these are the cases which are talked about, the absolute out there extreme cases. But then when it comes to debating them, they're saying, we shouldn't prevent anyone who wants it from getting it, and therefore, if you're going to broaden it, you're going to get people who don't fall into that very narrow category. You're going to have people who become eligible and who decide to take it. I mean, there was something posted on social media recently about a woman in Canada who was offered assisted suicide, and 8 years later she's she's still traveling the world and very much enjoying life. So for some people, some people would say that their elderly parents who are just very nice and don't want to say no to anything, could potentially be offered a doctor and just say yes out of politeness. That is a reality. Okay, maybe it's not going to happen with everybody, but for some people, they don't want to disagree with doctors, and so actually, all this stuff about barriers to access, that's what safeguards are, and so I think really, members of the other side were just kind of barking up the wrong tree.
I think it could perhaps expose that. For some politicians, I'm not saying all, but for some, they maybe would envision a wider version of what's being proposed for Scotland and for England. I think it's probably easier legislation to pass to have it limited to terminal illness. It's probably much more controversial because...
So why do you think people were doing that then? Because yes, you could imagine a situation whereby they pass a very, very, very narrow, tight law that broadly MPs and MSPs will get on board with, and they'll pass it. And then over time, as they have done in many other countries, they start to broaden it out. Why do you think that people just went for the big, broad, controversial law to begin with?
This really brings us to the point of suicide prevention. We've heard time and time again from proponents of so-called assisted dying that it would be wrong to use the term suicide because these people are effectively dying anyway, which is horrendous thing to say, and it's horrendous to put forward legislation which would actually endanger people and shorten their lives and endorse suicide for one particular group. So I think it allows a kind of doublethink where they can kind of avoid the fact that they are taking people's lives early and they are actually endorsing suicide. Whereas if you were to have a much broader law which wasn't limited to terminal illness, it's much harder to get around the fact that you are taking people's lives early, and that is facilitating suicide, or if it's euthanasia, killing people.
Well, and that's how we get all this euphemistic language about assisted dying, like it's just happening, like it's just passive, like doctors aren't taking role in giving people lethal drugs. But there's been a bit of a squeamishness about using proper language, hasn't there?
Yeah, sadly. And I think it's quite ironic because Dignity and Dying, who are behind both of these bills, they helped draft them for Scotland and for England and Wales.
And they've got a euphemistic title as well. They used to be the Voluntary Euthanasia Society.
Precisely.
Does what it says on the tin, and now they're just this lovely Dignity and Dying.
Yeah,
it sounds better.
They produced a report kind of called like a blueprint for the UK, basically based on Australia, of how they could copy the assisted dying laws, if to use their terminology, over here. And it's ironic because in 2023, the Federal Court of Australia ruled that their voluntary assisted dying is actually a form of suicide. So the fact that we've got bills in the UK which have been effectively drawn from Australia and also Oregon, and we're unwilling to reconcile the fact that these bills have been labelled suicide by their own countries, by their own legal system, is very ironic.
Yeah, and I think it shows a dishonesty as well. I mean, why use this euphemistic language if the public are so supportive of having an assisted suicide law, if parliamentarians are so supportive of this law change? But the reality is they know that they have to kind of hide behind this language because the public are overwhelmingly not supportive. And I think it's disingenuous and it's a dishonest tactic. But I think it's so important that we're consistent with the language that we use. And what's really interesting is we saw this in the House of Lords, we've seen in the Commons and in Holyrood as well, is that you can see how prickly the other side become when you just even use the words assisted suicide. And I think that's why it's so important that we are consistent and don't start slipping into using the language of assisted dying, because we have to be so clear about what this law change would actually do in practice.
Well, yeah, I mean, in England, it would have amended the Suicide Act.
Right.
And so that tells you
exactly
what the purpose of the bill is.
I think in stage 2 there was actually an audible gasp. Not stage 2. In second reading in the House of Commons, there was an audible gasp from an MP when it was said that this would actually amend the Suicide Act, because they hadn't actually realised that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, on the note, there's been a lot to cover on assisted suicide, and we could actually say a lot more, but I do want to move on to abortion. And just on this theme of using different language, talking about things very euphemistically and kind of obscuring the truth, that's what we see all the time when it comes to abortion. So decriminalising women who have abortions. One of the key things to realise, of course, is that this involves an unborn child. And so often in the debate, the unborn child is not mentioned at all.
Yeah, I think that was what was so sad watching the debates, was how sidelined the unborn baby is in these discussions. So in order to really understand how we got here with the abortion decriminalise amendment, we have to go back all the way to last summer when Tonya Antonazzi, a Labour MP, she tabled an amendment to an existing bill, so the Crime and Policing Bill. So it was really tacked on at a late stage in the House of Commons. And what that really meant is that it bypassed any committee scrutiny. There was no things like an impact assessment or evidence sessions, and it was actually passed after only 46 minutes of backbench debate.
You would think for something so extreme and having such a massive impact on society that it would get hours and hours and hours of debate, but yeah, it didn't get that.
Absolutely. And the public was denied any real opportunity to engage with the amendment because there was no public consultation. But what was really clear is that a group of MPs saw this as an opportunity to really force through and push through what is the most seismic change to abortion law since the 1967 Abortion Act. And then, of course, when it moved to the House of Lords, because it's part of a wider bill, there was very little opportunity again for peers to scrutinise it. And I think that's an important thing for the kind of public to be aware of, because I fear that this amendment's kind of come and gone and many people won't even have been aware that it's happened, that it's been voted on. Abortion decriminalisation has been framed as this kind of step forward for women's rights, that it's pro-woman, that it's feminist. But obviously it's the complete opposite, because we know it will endanger women, it will open wide the door to coercion. And also it's really interesting reading some of the commentary on this from individuals who describe themselves as pro-abortion, like Camilla Long. And she said that this idea that a woman should be spared of any and every inconvenience is almost sociopathic. And I'm paraphrasing here, but what she says is that to be a feminist is to be a defender of women's rights, but surely not to the point where you think it's absolutely fine and acceptable to kill a viable, healthy unborn baby. And of course, in all of this, there's also the kind of unspoken and uncomfortable truth that sex-selective abortion already exists in the UK. And never in these conversations, in these discussions, are the rights of the girl in the womb ever spoken of. But we know that there was a report from the Department for Health and Social Care which found that between 2017 and 2021, over 400 baby girls of families of Indian ethnicity were aborted, and it concluded that that pointed to evidence of sex-selective abortion. So under this law change, sex-selective abortion will become even worse, and the rights of girls in the womb is just never spoken of.
What it doesn't do, of course, is that it doesn't change. There are some things which don't change.
Right.
So technically, the abortion limit stays at 24 weeks for a doctor to be involved in the process.
Yeah.
Women can still only get these abortion pills if they say that they are under 10 weeks pregnant. Of course, the practicalities of these things are different. So, so what does it mean now if a doctor is involved after 24 weeks?
Yeah, so as you said, the general prohibition on the involvement of doctors post 24 weeks remains the same. But what this law change would do, of course, is lead to an increase in the number of women performing late-term dangerous at-home abortions. It's important to make that distinction between, as you said, the woman and the doctor. But this is a step towards full decriminalisation. I think we have to be alert to that fact. And certainly what pro-abortion advocates will be calling for next is for the involvement of doctors, is for doctors to be able to perform abortions for any and every reason up to birth. Because what they'll say is that it's cruel and it's unsafe for women to be having these abortions at home with no medical oversight or involvement. And of course, these drugs are very dangerous. As you said, Angus, the pills are only to be given up to 10 weeks, and for good reason, because the pills lose their efficacy and also they greatly increase the risk of complications. And complications are already a problem in England and Wales. I mean, since the introduction of pills by post scheme, 54,000 women have been admitted to hospitals in England with abortion-related complications. That's a horrifying statistic. That's complications like infection, incomplete abortion, and hemorrhaging. And that equates to 1 in 17 women who have had to receive urgent medical care following an at-home abortion. And we're just going to see an escalation in that number. It's going to worsen an already dangerous situation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it was picked up on in the House of Lords, this idea that some people, there's a rush to be seen as the most compassionate, the most progressive people, and actually people are stumbling over themselves trying to be the people to introduce the next progressive law. But ultimately, those people will never be satisfied by whatever law they can produce. And so, yes, decriminalising women who have abortions will not be the final step. Then it will be doctors, and there will be no reason not to in it. And yes, you're right, it will seem unsafe for women to be having these abortions at home.
And there was an opportunity on the 18th of March as well for peers to vote in a safeguard so that women who receive these abortion pills have to attend an in-person appointment. It's important to remember that before COVID, that was the status quo. That was normal clinical practice, that a woman couldn't take these drugs until she'd seen a doctor in person. They'd been able to assess her, check that she was indeed less than 10 weeks. They'd be able to reduce risk of complications. And also it provided, this is where the crossover really is with the assisted suicide issue, it provided doctors an opportunity to discover whether there was any coercion or whether any pressure that the woman was under to terminate the pregnancy. And so peers had the opportunity to revert to good and proper practice pre-COVID. That measure was temporarily done away with and sadly made permanent. But peers just voted down that amendment that was tabled by Baroness Stroud to reinstate in-person appointments, 191 votes to 119. That was peers' opportunity to demonstrate that they cared for women and cared about protecting women and not leaving them in these dangerous situations.
And there was a similar amendment, wasn't there, tabled by, I think it was the Bishop of Leicester, to introduce in-person appointments for those people who are under 18, and that was also rejected.
Yes, but yet an amendment was passed to allow this law to apply retrospectively. So women who have previously been convicted of killing their babies just days before birth will now have their criminal record deleted.
Yeah, it's difficult, even just talking about all of this stuff, because you just feel that it's such an atrocity. It's such a terrible thing that's happened, and it's actually difficult to kind of get your head around and to think, okay, how do we approach this now? Because it's just dreadful. But there's a lot of misinformation flying around as well. I posted a video on social media for the CI recently, trying to talk about what votes happened, and there were people commenting saying, "Oh, this guy's misleading you, he's lying," or just going along with, women's rights. You're just trying to take away women's bodily autonomy. Late-term abortion is absolutely necessary. We need to have all of these things. So, just as with assisted suicide, a lot of the support for abortion is totally ideologically driven, and yeah, there's actually not very much compassion. There's not very much care for some of the lives involved with assisted suicide. There's not much care for those people who are vulnerable, who are elderly, who are not necessarily terminally ill, but could be coerced. With abortion, it is preborn, the unborn children who are just completely ignored.
I do hope that as people have examined and scrutinised the assisted suicide proposals and come out against them, that they might apply the same examination of abortion laws as well. And I wonder, perhaps in time, as things become have become more extreme, as we've just seen in the last few weeks, that people might think again. I guess going through the school system and through university, if you're not a Christian, you're probably bombarded with the messages that, this is all about helping people, and about women's rights, and it's the kind thing to do. And it can probably be hard for people to step outside of that. But perhaps, given the changed climate and the extremity of the proposals, people are really seeing afresh, perhaps, what this really is, which is taking life. That's not helping anyone.
I think a lot of people do have an objection to abortion. They might support it in certain circumstances, but when you tell people, if you ask someone, should abortion be legal up to birth, it's only a very, very, very tiny minority who would actually support that. So almost everybody actually supports some kind of restrictions somewhere in the process. And MPs, when it was debated back in back end of last year, and peers very recently have just ignored the fact that the public don't want this. It's so extreme.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that, Angus, because I feel like our parliamentarians, especially on this issue, are completely out of step with public opinion. As you said, there's only around about 5% of the public who support a woman being able to abort her child up to birth without any criminal sanction.
I thought it was even less than that, but...
different polls turn up different results. But I mean, if we say that 5% on the upper end, there's other polling that's shown 1% support. And the reality is that this just does not sit comfortably with people. And that's why it's really interesting to read articles by individuals like Rebecca Paul. She's a Conservative MP, and Sharon Davies too in the House of Lords, who've spoken about the fact that they themselves are pro-abortion. But this legislation is just so extreme. The idea that just minutes before birth a baby could be aborted is not acceptable to the vast majority of people.
It remains the fact as well, we get a comment saying that late-term abortion is necessary, but actually the reality is that it's not, because, if the abortion limit was 24 weeks, as it has been for many, many years, it was set at 24 weeks because that was the so-called viability of the child. We actually know now that children can survive with medical care and medical attention even earlier than 24 weeks. But if we're talking about late-term abortions, 36, 37, 38 weeks, even right up to birth, there are, if you don't want that child for whatever reason, there's ways of ensuring that you don't have to look after that child, and someone will find a good home for that child that does not involve killing the child.
And we're told that women only ever have these late-term abortions because they're in situations of extreme distress. And while, of course, we have complete compassion for women in crisis, and we don't dispute the reality of the distress that many women may experience, what's never spoken about is the distress of the baby. And I'm grateful for the speech that Lord Curry wrote, which is now available to read on our website. He was just one of many peers who had intended to speak at report stage in the Lords on the Crime and Policing Bill, but just wasn't given the opportunity because it was a very truncated debate. But he makes this point. He repeatedly asks the question, what about the baby? And he also makes the point that many of the arguments that have been advanced in support of this law change could be applied with equal force to the newly born child. And he says, what is the difference between the moral status of a child just an hour before birth and an hour after? And of course, the answer is there is no difference. In terms of that child's development, their dignity, their existence is precisely the same child.
Essentially saying that one person has rights and one person doesn't have rights based on age or based on, are they inside or outside the womb, to me seems ridiculous.
And And our law seems to selectively suspend recognition of the humanity of the child, dependent on whether that baby's wanted. So we now have baby loss certificate schemes, which rightly recognise a miscarriage before 24 weeks as the loss of a real and irreplaceable child, while on the other hand, in the context of abortion, an unwanted baby is just merely regarded as a disposable part of the mother's body. And so we just have a complete paradox there in our lawmaking, and we really need to rehabilitate this idea that the baby in the womb matters regardless of whether that baby is a wanted child or not.
Yeah, it's a unique human life created in the image of God, and immensely valuable, whether or not the mother or sometimes father doesn't want that child. And we know that, again, coercion, just as there is with assisted suicide, coercion is an issue with abortion, and there've been some publicised cases of men, because of the pills by post scheme, men are somehow managing to get their hands on abortion pills. They find out their girlfriend or wife or whoever is pregnant, they don't want the child, and they crush up these pills and they give them to their partner in order to force them to have an abortion that they may not want, and men have been jailed for that.
Right.
But this is what all these loopholes and this lax law, it doesn't allow for that, but it creates an environment where it can happen.
Yeah, it certainly creates an environment in which coercion can flourish. And as a result of this law change, a partner could coerce a woman, as you've already said, into having an abortion, now in the knowledge that there will almost certainly be no police investigation into it. And that's the reality of what abortion up to birth for the woman means in practice, that it just provides a conducive environment for coercion.
Let's move on to some questions now. So some of the questions that we have. There appears to be a lack of appreciation of life, both in terms of abortion and assisted suicide. Do we agree?
I think it's been pretty exposed that, yes, that is the case. And certainly the assisted suicide and the abortion debates. I think sometimes if you scratch the surface of the reasons for why people support assisted suicide, they're not good reasons. I was speaking to someone and she said she was talking about a family situation, and she was saying about how her family live on this remote island, and kind of grandparents are ill, and the kind of how taxing it is for people to have to travel out to see them all the time, to meet them, as if this was a legitimate reason for wanting assisted suicide to be legalized. It's, I think, life isn't dependent on the value of a person's life isn't dependent on how much they can contribute to our economy or how independent they are, but from birth right to your very last days, your life matters.
Next question. This isn't over. They're going to come back. What are you going to do to prepare for the next assisted suicide bills?
Wow, this is an issue that the Christian Institute has been campaigning on for a long time. And as I said, we can't slip into complacency. I think we have much to give thanks to God for, just even in terms of that margin. That margin could only have been of God, but we have to continue our efforts. We need to build on the momentum that is there. Obviously, there's going to be a new intake of MSPs at Holyrood, and so we need to do our best in terms of educating and equipping on this issue. We need to make that defeat count in Holyrood. As I've said already, I think we need to have a positive focus on palliative care in the midst of this, but the arguments don't change from our side. You know, the need to better improve palliative care, the risks about coercion and doctor-patient relationship and so on. We don't have to rewrite our messaging. We just need to be faithful on this issue, and we just need to continue to do what we're doing in terms of researching these issues and exposing, very sadly, what's happening in other jurisdictions that have gone down this route.
You mentioned the election there as well, and I suppose it's a good opportunity really for Christians to if they get a candidate coming and knocking on
Absolutely.
their door, or they're seeing them out and about in the town, to actually say, well, what are your views on assisted suicide? And and if they're pro, they can challenge them on that, and if they're supportive, then that's someone who's not going to be voting for, or hopefully wouldn't vote for it if it were debated in Holyrood again. So that's definitely something that people, not just the Christian Institute can be doing, but our supporters can be doing over the next few weeks as well.
We've spoken of what changed MSP's mind. Well, undoubtedly the work of constituents as well. All the many people, we're grateful for our supporters that wrote about this issue, that went to the trouble of meeting with their MSP, and we need to keep that up. We don't want this conversation to just go away now that the bill has been defeated. We need to keep this a live issue. And as you said, there's a prime opportunity here for people all across Scotland to be asking their candidates about the issue of assisted suicide, abortion too, and to make this a live issue that people are speaking about.
Dodgy things seem to happen in hospitals all the time. Would an assisted suicide law make things worse?
I think the pandemic showed us that it would. There was obviously the Do Not Resuscitate, DNR scandals, where disabled people across the country had these assigned to them without their approval or knowledge, which is really a travesty. But I think it shows that there are many people whose lives are devalued. And if we just listen to the voices of people with disabilities, sadly, a lot of the time, things which are deeply inappropriate, like, I wouldn't want to live if I was in your situation, are said to them on a routine basis. And if you added assisted suicide to that equation, that could mean people feeling, when they're at a very low point, feeling that they are a burden. It would add to that being told, actually, yes, you are. Yes, your life doesn't matter. And that could drive someone to take their life with the help of the state.
We say that the option, the choice to die quickly becomes a duty to die.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or the only choice they have.
And I think it leads to a breakdown in trust. We talked about before about the doctor-patient relationship, but it breeds suspicion and breaks down that trust that is so integral to that relationship when assisted suicide's on the table, and especially going back to what we said about the fact that a doctor could be the one to raise it. It might never have entered that individual's mind, and yet the doctor saying it would come across as a suggestion that the individual should choose it. And so just going to what you said there about it quickly becomes the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do in society's eyes, and clearly the right thing to do in the eyes of my doctor.
And we, I think it was a Times column about a year and a half ago. It was Matthew Paris, yeah, that's right, who used to be an MP, and he now writes for The Spectator and The Times. And he basically just endorsed that opinion kind of openly, that yes, you are a burden, and it wouldn't be wrong to consider taking your life on that basis. And I think that really kind of exposes the root of assisted suicide and euthanasia. We know it was set up in the kind of 1930s by someone called Dr. Killick Millard, and he was in this correspondence you can find online of his with the Eugenics Society. They helped him set up this. So it's kind of no wonder we see so many lives devalued when they're not seen to contribute to society abroad where it's legalised. And it's not inflammatory to say that would happen here. It's what we've seen abroad. It's its roots. And we need to avoid this at all costs.
one final question, not a supporter question, but a me question. I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you both want to see now? Over the next couple of years, next 5 years or so, what do you want to see change?
I want to see the ideology just defeated. That's what I want. And I want people to be bold, to call out the use of euphemistic language, those sorts of things. I want people to be bold and to really tackle this head on. But I know that's a big one.
Well, yeah, I mean, we pray big prayers here at the CI, and I guess my prayer and my hope would be that we will turn back to to valuing the preciousness of life, to having a society-wide regard for the sanctity of life, both in the womb and at the end of life. I know on the issue of abortion especially, it feels like we have an uphill struggle ahead, but I'd love to see that broad coalition of opposition on the assisted suicide issue to be the same on the abortion issue. And I think it's up to each one of us to keep speaking about these issues and to keep praying about them.
Yeah, well, good things to hope for, to pray for. Like you say, a big battle ahead to get either of those things.
Right.
But yeah, that's something that we at the CI need to be working for, and our supporters need to be working towards that aim as well. I think we'll bring it to a close there. We hope you have enjoyed listening to today's episode. We hope that it's informative, encouraging and challenging as well. We do hope that you'll be able to join us in this important work. And again, if you have any questions, do email us at faithinaction@christian.org.uk. And again, do sign up so that we can tell you how you can be an influence. Go to the.ci/sign up. Thank you again. Goodbye. For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.